All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Brigitte Perot. This is Nicole Seymour. I'm a graduating senior majoring in English at Cal State Fullerton, and Dr. Seymour is an associate professor of English here at Cal State Fullerton. Our presentation today is a product of an independent study course that I've been taking with Dr. Seymour, which focuses on Cli-Fi, which is more commonly referred to as climate fiction, and the Anthropocene. Today we'll be focusing on four particular works that we covered in this course, starting with Nathaniel Rich's 2013 novel, Odds Against Tomorrow. The second one that we looked at is the 2013 film adaptation by Bong Joon-ho of the graphic novel series Snowpiercer, which was originally created by Jacques Loeb and Jean-Marc Rochet in 1982. The third on our list is Kim Stanley Robinson's 2017 novel, New York 2140, and our fourth is Rita Indiana's novel Tentacle, which was published originally in 2015 and translated into English in 2019. As we read these works, we both noticed that all reference Indigenous peoples, but often in problematically glancing or even appropriative ways. So what we'll do today is trace and theorize these absences and presences. Our work will be informed primarily by the framework of Indigenous Futurisms.
To quickly outline Indigenous Futurisms, we turn first to a 2018 post from Cherokee scholar Adrienne Keene's blog, Native Appropriations, which cites activist Damian Lee. Quote, "When I write, I avoid the phrase, in what is now Canada. I use, in what is currently Canada, to open possibilities for imagining futurities beyond the settler state." End quote. As Cli-Fi is arguably inherently about both the present and the future, we claim that Indigenous presence/absence in Cli-Fi calls out for sustained attention. Also important for our work is that of Anishinaabe scholar Grace Dillon. Dillon reminds us of the importance of survivance to the framework of Indigenous Futurisms, arguing that, quote, "survivance asserts Native presence and pushes back against the assumption that the only historical identity available to Indians in a post-manifest destiny world is that of victim," end quote. Dillon continues, quote, "Indigenous Futurisms focus on survivance, not merely survival, establishing vibrant Indigenous presence as a condition of the post-colonial," end quote. As we'll discuss, the works we cover lack this presence, with one important exception. So Nathaniel Rich's Odds Against Tomorrow focuses on Mitchell Zukor, a financial analyst who calculates risk scenarios for a consulting firm called Future World, located in a drought-plagued near-future New York. When storms begin threatening the city, Mitchell consults a historic map of the city to consider the consequences. As the narrator reports, quote, "In the days when Times Square was a red maple swamp and St. Mark's Place a hickory forest populated by hawks and ravens, more than 40 brooks and streams covered the island of Manhattan. During high tide, the Lenape Indians could canoe from the East River straight through to the Hudson River across what is now Canal Street," end quote, which is right next to Mitchell's office. Predictions become realities when a Category 3 hurricane hits Manhattan and the area undergoes catastrophic flooding. As the narrator reports, the two rivers have converged, quote, "as in the era of the Lenape Indians," end quote. Here the novel engages with the trope of the vanishing Indian, relegating Indigenous peoples to the past rather than acknowledging their current or future existence. Indeed, the diction, "what is now Canal Street," rather than "what is currently Canal Street," recalls Damian Lee's point. It marks settler colonialism as a stable present, even with the destabilizing effects of climate change. Further, the novel positions our white Jewish protagonist Mitchell as, in a sense, superseding the Lenape through a strange series of plot developments. So prior to the storm, we see Mitchell stumble into a fancy art gallery to escape the heat outdoors. He spots a brightly painted canoe made by a presumably white Canadian artist who, according to the gallery assistant, quote, "combines 60s psychedelic art with the folkloric art of First Nations tribes," end quote. Flush with his corporate earnings, Mitchell pays $29,000 for the canoe. As you might already be suspecting, when the storms flood New York, Mitchell and his girlfriend use this convenient and surprisingly functional art canoe to escape to New Jersey. Eventually, he starts a new life alongside a small group of other climate refugees in the Flatlands, a remote area of New York that, according to another character, quote, was working class, mostly black West Indians and Orthodox Jews, end quote, before the storms. Mitchell is thus a kind of climate gentrifier, arguably not too unlike Rich himself, who moved to New Orleans post-Hurricane Katrina. But what we're most interested in here is how the novel allows our protagonist to play Indian, to riff on the eponymous 1999 book by Standing Rock Sioux scholar Phil Deloria, as a means towards his survival. In the future world of Odds Against Tomorrow, the only living Indian is a white man. We find similar dynamics in Korean director Bong Joon-ho's adaptation of the French graphic novel series Snowpiercer. The film takes place in the 2030s on board a high-speed train circling the Earth, the last refuge for humanity after a climate engineering solution designed to cool temperatures backfired, triggering a new ice age. Following the graphic novels, the train cars are class segregated in the film, with those in the front enjoying a lavish lifestyle and those in the back living in crowded and filthy conditions. A white hero in the form of U.S. actor Chris Evans arises to lead the back of the train people to freedom. The moment that interests us most is when another back of the train character named Nam, played by Korean actor Kang Ho-song, points out to his daughter Yona, Korean actress Ko Ah-sung, a set of corpses outside the train window. Known as the Frozen Seven, these people tried to leave the Snowpiercer but froze to death. Nam tells his daughter in Korean, quote, "That's a woman in the front, a cleaning lady from the front section. She was Inuit, Eskimo. She taught me about every type of snow and ice. She believed we could survive outside the train," end quote. The film then cuts to a shot of the racist white school teacher, played by U.S. actor Allison Pill, who teaches the front of the train children. She tells them in English, quote, "If we ever go outside the train, we'd all freeze and die," end quote. Eventually, the film proves her wrong, as Yona and an unrelated black child, fortified by animal skins, escape the train and live. And I should mention here that the director has indicated in interviews that the Inuit woman was imagined as the character Nam's wife, and the daughter as therefore part Inuit. Moreover, he has noted that the Inuit woman's attempted escape was simply too early in terms of improved environmental conditions. But if you only watch the film, these points are not obvious from the film itself. These two scenes, the introduction of the dead, frozen Inuit woman and her parent daughter's escape, are complicated from the perspective of Indigenous Futurisms. On the one hand, the Inuit woman does not get to be alive and present in the film or even have a name. We can't even really see her body, it's just a frozen white shape. Moreover, these scenes constitute just a tiny part of the overall film. Indigenous characters and ideas are otherwise absent. And yet, we're struck by a couple things here. First, considering that the train loops around the same locations every year, the woman remains present even in death, like a kind of statue or memorial that one might revisit for inspiration. Second, she correctly predicted an eventual future in which humans can return outside, although, as I just indicated, she loses her life testing this prediction too early. Still, it's hard to call hers a vibrant Indigenous presence, to recall Grace Dillon, especially as the film does not make the link to the future generation, that is to her daughter, very clear.
In a vein similar to Odds Against Tomorrow, Kim Stanley Robinson's New York 2140 takes place after massive flooding in the title city and follows multiple character perspectives as they adapt to life in what is often referred to as a super Venice version of New York City. In its 600-page entirety, New York 2140 makes reference to Indigenous people 3 times, and only 2 of these are direct references to Indians. The first is in a conversation about gold that has been found underwater and monetized through somewhat dubious methods, and which has been, quote, snapped up by the Indian government, end quote. Franklin, a young white financial trader and one of the 7 main characters, comments that, quote, "They're the last gold bugs left. They really like it. Maybe it's a cultural thing. Maybe it's because Indians like their bling so much," end quote, which is met with somewhat flimsy reproach by his love interest, Charlotte. The fact that she's an immigration lawyer set on fixing discriminatory border laws makes her half-hearted rebuke somewhat disappointing, and the comment itself shows a willful ignorance towards Indigenous culture. The second is during an exchange between the 2 youngest characters, Stefan and Roberto, and their mentor, Mr. Huckster, who tells them that, quote, the Indians figured that bears were the big brothers of beavers, and beavers were the big brothers of muskrat, end quote. The mention of the all-encompassing Indian in this context really serves no other purpose than perhaps to evoke a perceived sense of mystic moralism or tribal wisdom to add to Mr. Hexter's mentor status, despite the fact that he doesn't have any tie to Indigenous peoples of New York. It's a mere factoid akin to something you'd read in a natural history museum. The most notable reference occurs fairly early in the novel and is marked by its oversimplification of America's colonial upbringing, in a conversation between two of the main characters, Mutt and Jeff. When Jeff asks about why people didn't live in New York before those who came across the sea, Mutt replies, quote, well, that's another story. Actually, there were people there already, I have to say, but alas, they didn't have immunity to the diseases that the new people brought with them, so most of them died. But the survivors joined this community and taught the newcomers how to take care of the land so that it would stay healthy forever, end quote. While this conversation recharacterizes early colonial tensions in a way similar to the story of the first Thanksgiving, it does give credit, however minimal, to Indigenous ways of living as more utopian. As Adrienne Keene points out in her post, Western thought, which is predominantly white, likes to credit modern-day science and technology for discoveries in opposition to folk knowledge, unless they come to the same conclusions. This can easily be transferred to environmental theories as well, such as crediting Alda Leopold, who is quoted by Robinson at least once, if not a couple times throughout the novel, as being one of the first people to suggest that treating the land with respect is the correct way to treat the land. This ignores Native American and Indigenous cultural beliefs of environmental respect and conservation that far predate any contemporary environmental ideas. And while Robinson may briefly point to the benefits of these beliefs, it's easily lost in a novel that favors changing and improving environmental conditions through Western thought and technology. Our final novel, Rita Indiana's Tentacle, has a complex time travel plot set in the Dominican Republic, in which the main character, Isilde, inhabits 3 different bodies and 2 different genders at 3 different points in time. The catastrophe in Tentacle starts when biological weapons being washed out to sea result in pollution that spreads to the Atlantic and causes the ocean to become a shade of, quote, contaminated chocolate, end quote. Giorgio, one of Isilde's bodies existing in the past, devises a plan for a conservation lab in Playa Bow that would save the coastal reefs and in turn potentially prevent the pollution from happening in the future. As compared to the other novels included in the Tentacle is an example of climate fiction that characterizes Indigenous culture and religion as being integral to the state of the environment and its resurrection. In this plotline, the planet depends on sea anemone and Yoruba rituals, and it also doesn't eschew credit from the scientific actions taken to save the environment. This is seen in the significance of the lab, which can be seen as a place of religious and scientific intersectionality. As Giorgio states, quote, this lab is the altar I'm going to build for Olokun, which is the ruler of all bodies of water in the Yoruba religion, in which I'll turn Omekunle, who is the woman that Isilde works for, and his mother, Yoruba prayers into an environmental call to action, end quote. We also see religion and tradition tied with technology throughout the novel as well, most notably in Isilde's gender transformation. Not only can the scene be seen as the birth of a savior figure comparable to that of Christ himself, because they take shelter in an already occupied apartment as well as fulfilling a religious prophecy, but Eric, who is a doctor as well as the son of Omekunle, uses both Rainbow Bright, a modern medical serum used to change people's gender, and folkloric methods to transform Isilde into a man. Tentacle is also unique in the environmental disaster, in that the environmental disaster takes place in the Dominican Republic. Unlike the financial epicenter New York is characterized as in Odds Against Tomorrow, New York 2140, the Dominican Republic is part of the world that is not known for being a global economic power. In spite of this, its environmental misdeeds ultimately have global impact. This raises an important point about visibility and global ecologies. Western literature tends to focus on places that have economic power, or wealth, as an environmental litmus test that decides or illustrates environmental catastrophe. Places that do not have economic power are largely ignored or are an afterthought, which is a sentiment that runs throughout New York 2140. Economic power is presented in this novel as the lab requires funds garnered by the connected art gallery to be created. But the true power, the power to change, is wielded instead by Indigenous tradition and its connection to the land and ocean, which is represented by the sea anemone portal and playa bow. The gatekeepers to this portal are some of the last remaining Indigenous people, Nanuko and Anani, who are portrayed as having narrowly escaped the initial colonization of the Dominican Republic and resulting whitewashing of Dominican Hispaniola culture due to imperial influences. The survival of the Dominican coast, and as an extension the world, depends on the Indigenous. This is seen in Anani's upbringing and her close connection with her history. Quote, the book said there were fewer than 600 Tainos by 1531, and that a little later they had completely disappeared. Her family, descended from caciques and bejiques, had survived. Like many others in the Republic, they'd stayed in contact with to marry their young and enact their rituals. The book said nothing of the men from the water, who came every so often to help them, nor of the Spanish, who'd stolen power from the Arawaks to conquer the other tribes on the continent. End quote. Thus, unlike the previous three novels, Tentacle provides an opportunity for vibrant Indigenous presence and power across multiple time periods, in the face of a genocidal past.
Looking forward, we are interested in reading Cli-Fi by actual Indigenous authors that might ameliorate the absences and whitewashings we've just described. Indigenous Cli-Fi is a small but growing movement that includes Indigenous Australian writer Alexis Wright's 2013 novel, The Swan Book. We are also interested in reading more sci-fi by Indigenous authors, such as Métis Canadian author Cherie Dimoline's 2017 novel, The Marrow Thieves. As Indigenous cosmologies typically see the human and non-human as one larger whole, Indigenous literature more broadly always has something to tell us about environment and climate writ large. And although we've only mentioned Indigenous Futurisms so far, there's of course overlap and connections amongst that framework, Afrofuturisms and Latino Futurisms, such as in the work of Nnedi Okorafor and Gloria Anzaldúa. And in fact, we would propose that Tentacle should be read through all three of those lenses in future scholarship, given the human diversity of the Caribbean. We look forward to reading more work like Tentacle that is highlighting both diversity in terms of the people involved in the story and the places that have been historically marginalized in Cli-Fi and more broadly. Thank you.
Thank you.